Hello F11 members and welcome to the Fundamentals of Post-Production video tutorials for issue 56, September 2016. Now what we have on the screen in front of us here is a shot of one of my favourite places in Dorset, the Neolithic hill fort of Hambledon Hill, a very evocative place that I've photographed many times. But this was shot just a couple of weeks ago on a beautiful summer's evening. We were blessed with gorgeous light, very little haze and a dramatic sky. And although I've photographed here several times before, I was very pleased with this shoot and this shot because I've not done this particular view before. So I'd like to talk through with you the post-production on this image because I think it combines numerous various techniques that I think are quite interesting. So this is the finished product and we're going to work through how I got to here. So let's just come out of Photoshop and into Lightroom, and here we have the images from that shoot. If I just go to the grid view, here we have these two images here from a bright one and a dark one. Now I chose, when I was there, to, instead of trying to do the picture using one exposure, in this particular case I made a bright one here for the landscape, ignoring what the sky was doing because of the contrast range, and a dark one to keep the very best of the light, the very best of the detail in that bright sky. Slightly contre-jour lighting and shot with the 17mm TSE lens here, you see. So over here I'm hanging on to the highlights in this, the brightest backlit part of the sky, and I've made a separate exposure for the landscape. The reason I didn't try and do it all in one exposure using a filter to hold back, the ND grad filter to hold back the sky, was I thought the grad line along the top of this hill fort, which would have needed to go around about here, would just be too visible and too unsightly. So I think this was the best solution. So I'm going to talk you through how I merged these exposures. But first of all, I just want to show you one thing before we get stuck in. If I go to this image, now you may notice it's a slightly letterbox type format I'm using here. It is in fact the 16:9 aspect ratio format, which I think is particularly appealing for this kind of picture. It's one I've been using quite a lot recently, just going through one of those phases maybe. And of course I have the option to select that aspect ratio in camera, which enables me to compose the image to that aspect ratio in camera. The thing is, of course, when I bring it into Lightroom, and if I go show you now the crop marks, I've selected that option in camera and it's applied the crop, but of course all the information, the full frame is there. And if I wanted to fine-tune and change that or go back to the full 2:3 aspect ratio, I could do. Just by selecting it in camera helps me behind the lens to compose to the best of that aspect ratio. So let's come out of that now and just talk about what I'm going to do with this image here. So as usual, the first thing I do is look at my black and my white points. But one thing we've got to realize here is I'm ignoring the sky. I'm just looking at the landscape in this picture, so I'm not at all concerned about what is going to happen, particularly to those highlights in that burnt out sky. So if I hold down my Alt key and move the blacks to the left a touch, I can't go very far at all before I start clipping blacks. In fact, really just a minimal shift to -4 on my blacks, but with my whites I'm going to hold down the Alt key again and move the white slider to the right. Now you can see where I'm clipping highlight information there, but as I said, I'm not concerned about the sky, I'm just looking at the landscape. So I'm going to go quite a way over to plus 80 or so on my whites to just give a bit of contrast and brighten up that foreground, the landscape detail. Okay, now I'm going to look at my point curve here, and what I'm going to do is just add a little bit of contrast and a touch more brightness. So I'm going to go up there on my point curve, pull the blacks down a touch there, and I think that's looking right about right there. I'm now going to add a little bit of vibrance here, just a touch, because I've already added contrast to the image, so I could easily go over the top with this. So it's just a teaspoonful, really, plus 6 of vibrance there. I'm going to sharpen the picture and apply my edge masking as usual. Hold down the Alt key, slide the mask and slide it to the right until the black is applied just on the sky. That's good. And now let's just have a look at that. I think that's probably it for the moment. So I'm now going to export this picture and open it in Photoshop. So if I go Library, Export, and there it is. It's going to open that up in Photoshop as a 16-bit TIFF. Okay, now I'll do that. But first of all, I just want to come back to this image and do a second version of it. So let's do this. And now I'm going to just add, because I'm just a bit concerned that some of this shadow detail here in the darkest part of the bushes is actually blocking in, just a little bit too dense. So what I'm going to do is come onto this, come back to the linear point curve, come back on my blacks and add a bit of shadow detail. I'm going to go up to, oh, how much? About plus 40 on my shadows there. And now that's given an image that is just way too bright, but stick with me. We're going to merge all these three different exposures together to optimize the image. Okay, I'm going to export that as well and open it in Photoshop. Okay, and now I'm going to come and work on the dark image for the sky. Righto, so what do I want to do with this? Let's have a look at the dark image, and the first thing I want to do as usual is go to the develop module and look at my black points and my white points. And the first thing I'm going to do is adjust my whites. So hold down Alt, move whites to the right. I can go to about there before you start to see a bit of clipping taking place in that brightest part of the image, plus 20. I'm also going to add a touch of vibrance, again a smidgen, plus 10, and I'm going to come back on my highlights to pull that detail here in the brightest part of the sky back. I'm going to go to about minus 30-ish on that. Okay, and now I'm going to look at my, I'm looking at the sky now, and I think it just looks a bit dingy. I think it needs a bit of contrast. So I'm going to come to here and select my point curve and set the medium contrast preset to just give a bit of contrast to that sky. Now then, one thing that strikes me, ignore the landscape, which is just totally black, But the sky on this half of the image is much darker than it is over here. Well, we would expect that because, you know, of the angle of the light and the width of the shot using the 17mm very wide angle lens. But what I'm going to do is just balance that up a little bit by using a grad filter here. And I'm going to use it from right to left. Now, we've not done this before, so just stick with this. I'm going to hold down the Shift key and pull the grad filter in. Oh, excuse me, that didn't, just delete that one. Okay, so hold down the filter, hold down the Shift key, and bring in the grad filter from the right hand side of the image to almost all the way to the left. And now what I'm going to do is actually brighten this image. Use the grad tool to brighten the right hand part of the image. How much? Well, that's a moot point, but I would say to about there. I always have to think what looks natural, but that's looking good to me. So I'm going to give it that on the exposure. I'm going to add a little bit of contrast, around about 18, say, on the contrast. And I'm just going to tweak my whites as well here because I think they're looking a bit mucky. Come to the right here on my whites, and that just cleans up the whites in the sky in this part of the image. I think it's transformed that sky. Same with the blacks, just come in on the blacks a bit. Now that's given a bit of contrast to the sky as well, but only the area of the grad that I'm working with. And I click on Done. And I'm now going to export this image and open it up in Photoshop and blend the three images together using layer masking. I think we'll do that in part 2. So just to recap on what we've done so far. We've done 2 conversions of the brightest image here, one optimized for just generally for the best look of the image, and one optimized for the shadow areas. We've exported those and they're ready to be opened in Photoshop and merged. And we've made a third exposure using a third TIFF using this darker exposure, which has been made just for the sky. So I'll see you back here in part 2 in a minute. Thank you.